I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast this Friday morning with Mark and Rosie.
Time to go through the papers. Joining us to do that again, David Mellor, former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and broadcaster Liz Kershaw. Morning again to both of you.
Welcome again.
Liz, let's start in the Times if we can. House prices set to fall 9% by the autumn of 2024.
Yeah, I think relating back to yesterday's budget, we made a big deal about keeping the cap on stamp duty to help first-time buyers particularly. So lots of property issues involved. Property prices, yeah, it's supply and demand. If mortgages are higher, monthly repayments, there'll be fewer people who'll think, I'm going to commit to that and buy. So less demand means reduced prices. But I also think there's going to be a huge rush to sell among people who've bought property in a
Exactly.
place of a pension, like me.
Was it a second home, you mean a second property?
I've said before, I've got a few that I bought over the years and worked to pay off the mortgages.
And you're going to have to pay double council tax.
I completely refurbished them and I rent them out to young people. I've just spoken to somebody in the office actually at GB News, and she and two of her friends in London are paying £3,000 a month for a 3-bedroom flat. Not even in the city centre, in Clapham. Absolutely exotic. So, anyway...
Even if you're renting it, certainly, yeah.
I was thinking of maybe cashing one in, but I think among landlords now, there'll be a rush to sell before capital gains allowance is £12,000 when you sell somewhere. It's going to be cut to £6,000.
Go and buy a hotel in Kent. I'll give you £1 million then.
I'll tell you what, I would rather starve than go along with that scheme.
Okay,
but anyway.
Telegraph, David.
Yes, defence spending. This is an interesting one, you see, because the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, who is one of the ministers I approve of, by the way, and there aren't that many of them, so I'm not making a point against him, but he said that, effectively said that he wasn't prepared to stay on unless defence expenditure went up to 3% from its current level of 2%.
3% of GDP, which is a big
GDP, that's right. And basically, he's grinned and borne it because they're not going to put defence spending up. The only thing I would they
were talking about sort of 2%, which is...
It is 2%.
Yeah, which is still a fairly hefty increase.
No, it's 2%. That's what it's been for some considerable time. But
it's still an increase as such.
I don't think so. But it depends what... But you see, one of the problems, of course, with defence, when I was Chief Secretary of the Treasury, we had our list of departments we didn't approve of. Top of that list, defence. The amount of money they spend on new equipment that then doesn't work. Look at that. We built 2 aircraft carriers, one of which can't get out of a port without something breaking down.
Yeah, they've also spent $6 billion, I think, on this Ajax tank project.
Well,
they can't even get it to work properly.
This is great because I was about to mention it, and you mentioned it for me because I thought I was the only one who remembered this.
Yeah.
£6 billion, and it's not going to work. So the idea that somehow if you throw money at a problem, you're actually going to help solve it, and you end up, a lot of these defence contractors take the government for a ride. It's a sadness.
Well, maybe a sadness for spirit drinkers, Liz. Let's move to the Express, page 7. What's happening to the price?
Yeah, because he didn't even have a glass of whiskey at the dispatch box yesterday, did he?
I wondered if he did, but he didn't. I was watching the budget speech on GB News yesterday, and being of a certain age, was wondering when is he going to mention, 10p on fags or 20p on a bottle of beer, and he didn't. It was
because it's an autumn statement, not a budget.
Right? Yes, yeah, right. Well, it's hidden away in the small print, like a lot of things. By the way, the reason to mention capital gains tax in that context was I think it's going to make it even harder for young people to find somewhere to rent.
This is going back to the property issue.
So this is now a blow to enterprise. We were talking earlier about Yes, pensioners getting 10.1%. Yes, people on benefits getting that. We're hard-working people in the middle, not. This is not going to encourage hard-working enterprise. And one of the little cottage industries it's actually become massive is gin making. Everywhere you go now in Britain,
craft gin
has its own craft gin, and people collect it, and it's thriving. The other huge business for the UK, particularly Scotland, because most of it's made there, obviously, is whiskey with an E, made in Northern Ireland as well. We're not overlooking that.
You get Welsh whiskies now.
You do, yeah. But he's slapped huge tax rises on whiskey. So there's going to be a new rate of tax on anything really weak, like David's favourite beer, Budweiser, up to 3.4%. Then other drinks up to 8.4%, that's not wine, and then 8.5% to 22%, which covers all wines. But the highest hike is going to be on 22% and over, which is whiskey and gin. Now, the food and drink industry to Scotland after oil, and it's part of Nicola Sturgeon's bedrock for wanting independence, is whiskey. It's a huge export, as you mentioned, and also if the price goes up, demand's going to.
A lot of old distilleries have come back into action as well, that they managed to get them going again.
It's another thriving area of industry. I don't think they've thought this, right, we'll make a quick grab on whiskey, we'll make a quick grab on housing sales, but the long-term implications, have they thought them through?
Former Chief Secretary of the Treasury, thought it through?
No, I don't think they have.
Right.
I think a lot of this, it's a bit like being caught in a storm. You never know where the wind or the rain is going to come next and whether it's going to blow you off your feet. These people are not in control of events, so I don't necessarily blame them for that. It's just a statement of fact.
Shall we move from the economy to some entertainment? But the hybrid, of course, with Matt Hancock in the jungle, which means we have politics, entertainment, all playing into one thing.
These aren't the pictures of him in his underpants, are they?
Oh, well, no.
We may have to look away now.
It's a respectable picture of him barbecuing. Of his. And by the way, I haven't watched a single millisecond.
Oh, you might not be the best person to talk to us about it.
Oh no, heavens above! Why would it?
So
what was it? The great wit who said, "I never read a book before criticising it. It might prejudice me." Well, this is exactly what I feel about
the Mail, page 29. Says life's a beach for Hancock and Jungle Gang.
Yeah. I mean, basically, because he's been such a
it's a really boring picture.
It is.
There are pictures, I gather, on the online edition showing him in his underpants. But I think maybe at this time in the morning, that's not the thing to do.
That's doesn't do much for me. But basically, they flew them to the beach so he could enjoy good food, much of which he cooked. But I'm more interested in one element of this, which is, what is this doing to him? Is he rescuing himself, or is he making sure he can never come back into politics again?
Well, Liz, which do you think?
I think he's going to do quite well out of it. Yeah, especially his book, which is coming out coincidentally and funnily enough as soon as he leaves, whenever that may be.
But they say that he's going to be one of the first to be voted off.
I don't think so.
Nadine Dorris was in. How long did she last? I'm just trying to think back.
No, I don't. That was one I particularly missed.
Yeah, right, okay. And I think Lembit Opik, of course, who was the Lib Dem.
Yes, who was good fun, yes. Yeah. He came on to talk about it a few weeks ago.
Indeed.
And, I mean, he's safe, because the thing about it is he doesn't take himself too seriously. The worry for Matt Hancock is he does.
Right,
yes.
Okay, fair enough. NHS, you wanted to talk about the NHS and product. How do you get productivity in the NHS?
Well, I suppose you apply equipment, capital resources, buildings, staff levels to a figure for how many actual procedures take place. People through the doors. And this is saying declining productivity in the NHS is putting plans to tackle long waits for treatment and cancer care at serious risk. Now, I don't trust the Office for Budget Responsibility. They always get the forecast wrong. The Office for National Statistics I've got some time for. The National Audit Office I have a lot of time for. And they say the health service productivity has fallen by 16% since the pandemic, and that NHS bosses expect poor performance to continue this year. The report said there was more sickness absence and less willingness to work overtime. highlighted. So, as we were saying earlier, how do you increase productivity?
Well, I can tell you, because it was one of the issues that we unsuccessfully grappled with. When I was a health minister, you could compare, for instance, I know general surgery, the hammer and chisel stuff, how many operations these surgical teams up and down the country did in a week, and the variation was unacceptable. I mean, I remember my favourite one was, in those days, the greatest heart surgeon we had was Professor Magdi Yacoub, and he was doing more complex heart operations in a week than some of these people were doing, you know, some of the basic hammer and chisel stuff. I mean, the hammer and chisel stuff has got to be done, but it's not exactly sophisticated or difficult. But what depresses me, tens of billions of pounds more are being spent on the NHS than it was on my day. This was identified as something that there had to be more equalising of performance, and they haven't done it. You know, it's like part of the reason is people don't argue about the NHS in terms of outputs. All they argue about is inputs. We're going to spend more on the NHS. Well, what does that mean if you don't get more
well, they're getting
out the other end?
They're getting £3.3 billion more. I can give you two quick examples of total inefficiency very quickly. My mum was in hospital for one thing, in a ward on one floor. I went to a home. In the post was a letter to go to the maxillofacial clinic to have some teeth out. That was on the floor below, immediately below the bed she was lying in. The hospital said that she had to be discharged and then come in as an outpatient to the maxillofacial department. I went into the corridor, pinched a wheelchair at the appropriate time of the appointment, put my mum in myself and took her down there with the letter in my hand, and she got her teeth done. I went back, that's part one, I went back and with a letter discharged from that department. It said she had to have mouth rinses 3 times a day, warm water and salt. The ward said, we don't have salt. So I said, well, could you get some? So they went to the one nurse begrudgingly went to the canteen, brought back 2 tiny sachets off a table. I said, oh, for God's sake. I went out to the hospital, walked across the road to Morrison's, bought a big plastic thing of salt for 38p, went back and put it on the locker and said, there you go. I mean, why do those things happen? It's just poor management, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, therein lies perhaps the issue. Maybe it's not the staff or the productivity, it's the management of the staff.
Of course.
And again, notable remembering from my time there that we worked it out that the NHS had a supply centre which sent out all basic equipment. Loo rolls, that sort of thing.
Hammers and chisels.
And it was cheaper to get the loo rolls if you walked into the local supermarket than to get it through the NHS.
Oh yeah.
And light bulbs, that was the other thing we remember, of course.
But I think
£7 light bulb, yeah.
But when I hear people saying not enough money is spent on the NHS, I mean, there are 2 answers to that. One is the NHS could consume all the money that there is available to spend on anything. But more troublingly, the reality is that what matters in any business is output. And no one ever talks about output in the NHS until you get a story like this one, which will probably be as quickly forgotten as it was written down. You know?
David, Liz, thank you both very much for taking us through the papers this morning.